Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, Airheads, is funny because, well, as people probably remember back when I reviewed episode 1, I used character art of Toby, and some of you may have noticed that in his character art, he's holding a warhammer. And this is the episode where he officially gets said warhammer, and the way he gets it is hilarious and great. So, yeah, this episode is a very comical episode, of course, but that doesn't really, well, it does have its moments of character development. Obviously a big major conflict of the episode is, as we find out, is that Toby is jealous of Claire and openly is very passive aggressive to her throughout the entire episode. So it winds up becoming a major character development thing. Yeah, this is mostly just about how Toby just gets his warhammer, and it's funny. It's a funny episode, and yeah. So, in any case, the episode does open up with Claire having since obtained Angorot's shadow staff, and this is the first time we get a good look at it, because up until now he's just kind of stuck it. Angorot has just kind of been sticking it in his back pocket. We haven't really seen anybody using it, so yeah, we haven't really gotten a good look at it. But now that Claire has it, we're able to actually properly see it, and of course she immediately demonstrates her ability to, swing it around like, a weapon, like it's supposed to be. But and of course Droll is training her in how to use it, pointing out that teaching her how to make portals and all those kinds of things. But Claire is getting the whole combat training part of it, but not really the whole making portals aspect of it. But meanwhile, Toby is watching her train and outright vents to Arg while they're training that he's a little bit upset that she's kind of new to the team, and yet she's already been entrusted with this very powerful, very important artifact, and very important weapon. And he's obviously frustrated because he was by Jim's side since day one. He openly admits that, and he openly admits that he feels like he's not going to be able to, with Claire now being able to actively help the team. He's realizing that he's wondering what exactly he has that could help. And Arg just remarks that he'll always have him and calls him his wingman, which of course Toby then proceeds to appreciate, but also points out that while he's training with Arg, we do know that Claire is currently trying to figure out how to make a portal and is frustrated with it. But of course, Droll is telling her what he needs to do about how she needs to focus on what she wants, and that'll help her make a portal. But of course she's just frustrated about the fact that it's not making portals for her, and then in her frustration makes a portal because as we find out, the shadow staff draws from her emotions, and the stronger the emotions that are attached to it, the more she'll be able to actually create portals. But of course Toby openly jokes to her, and of course Toby admits that that's a cute little portal, because even though they could maybe transport a tiny little mouse through, which of course causes her to become upset with him. But he also admits that if she's going to have a weapon, then he's going to have a weapon as well, and immediately he starts looking for a weapon on the weapons rack, and eventually comes across his warhammer, which he notices pretty cool. But it quickly becomes apparent that he can't quite pick it up. But and of course he eventually settles for just using a broom to spar, and he just starts sparring with Claire after that point. And of course he continues to vent about how frustrated he is with how she's gotten to with her whole weapon thing, and also points out that she lost the kill. That obviously it's disappointing that she gained a new magic staff but lost the killstone, which of course causes her to become increasingly frustrated because he keeps holding that over her head about how she lost the killstone, this really important thing that they need. And but also points out that she got Anger Rot's staff in the process. But also points out that Toby merely points out that Jim is being chewed out by ghosts because of her, and that it's entirely her fault. And that if Jim were here, he'd give her a piece of his mind as well. But of course, what we find out is that Jim is not really interested in any of that. He's currently in the void. And of course, everybody is yelling and of course all the ghosts are yelling at him for losing the kill stone, of course, because they're frustrated. They're obviously all the other troll hunters. They're frustrated about the fact that Jim lost the kill stone, and of course do point out that Jim said that his team would make him his team would make him weak, but obviously he feels like his team not pulling their weight is what would make him weak instead. And of course Jim points out to the ghosts that, hey, it was a mistake. It's a minor setback, and they'll get the kill stone back. But also points out that since the other troll hunters have obviously fought Anger Rot, that they could very easily give him strategies on how to beat him. But of course what we find out is that from Kanjgar specifically is that no, Jim's kind of in uncharted territory, because what we find out is that when Anger Rot kills a troll hunter, he completely consumes their soul. So he effectively, no troll hunter has ever fought him and lived to tell the tale. And literally, because their spirits have been completely consumed, and they can no longer, share the fact that they fought him and any experience on how to fight him. But so of course they quickly realize, and of course Kanjgar immediately points out that he is also worried that Jim's devotion to his friends would be his undoing, but now he's realizing it would be the other way around, that his friends might lose their lives if they continue to help Jim without ever getting proper training. And with that, he sends Jim back to the Waking World, where he comes back to see Claire and Toby arguing and fighting with each other, and sparring. And what we find out is that Arg and Arg and Droll do not intervene at all, because Droll just points out that it would be good exercise and points out that they should just get it all out of their system. So, when Jim comes back, Toby is still giving her a hard time about how she lost the killstone, about the shadow staff and all the other things, but which causes Claire to then proceed to create a portal directly at Toby's head. And if Jim hadn't been there, Toby might have very easily lost it. So, yeah, Jim pushes Toby right out of the way, and Toby does remark about how he almost got killed, and it's at this point where Jim points out that the council was completely right. And when Droll pushes further, asking them what his father said, Jim just points out that he was Kanjgar's completely right. If they're going to actually get the killstone back and defeat Anger Rot, they're going to all need to pull their weight and become stronger, and that includes him. And he also points out that since the council doesn't really know how to handle Anger Rot yet, they're not going to be able. They don't really know if they can be defeated. He points out that they're absolutely going to need to bring their A game, and find a way to destroy him, because the council is just no help, for obvious reasons. But in any case, as Jim is kind of giving them all a pep talk, it's at this point where Bagdwella runs in and with a call for the Trollhunter, and Jim is confused as to what's going on, and asks her what's happening, and she reveals that she actually has a box and she needs Jim to deliver it, since she wants it to deliver to her sister underneath the trailer park, and admits that of course Jim is confused as to why she doesn't just handle it herself, but she points out that the human mail system is a lot better than the troll one, because as we find out, the troll couriers just eat whatever they're supposed to deliver instead of actually delivering it. So she points out that Jim is a lot better than the mail system. At which point Jim of course points out that he's not really, that he didn't think answering the call meant delivering mail, but she's insisting that it's a call and that he has to answer it. So she then proceeds to hand him the box that needs to be delivered and tells him not to look into it under any circumstances or open it or anything else. And with that, she leaves. And of course, everybody's visibly confused. But Jim, Toby, and Claire then proceed to go to school, where Jim just kind of places it in his locker and concludes that that's going to be the last of that. But of course Claire is insistent on Claire's insistent that they know what the box is and what to deal with it, and of course Toby is and of course Jim is obviously points out that he's not just going to look into it, because obviously he was under express orders not to open it into discussion. And Toby is also insistent that they look inside of it because he's also curious, but also points out that but also Jim points out that obviously he doesn't want anybody looking into it because they were under express orders, again, not to open it. So he then proceeds to tell them that, hey, we're not going to open it. We're just going to, he admits he's just going to go to the post office during lunch and drop it off. And that's going to be the end of that, and it'll be an easy victory for Team Trollhunters. At which point, Steve only half overhears what they're talking about, and he immediately insists that Jim isn't going to win so easily today, because as we find out, it's the all-day touch-a-truck-a-thon for the Spring Fling, and of course, it's one of the several competitions that the nominees for the Spring Fling King and Queen dance have to go to and attend and do a thing with. Of course, Jim is obviously a little upset because when Steve brings it up, and then also proceeds to boastfully brag about how he's going to win and beat Jim, and that there's nothing his hands can't touch, which it then makes a bit of a pass on Claire, which she rejects adamantly, but he then proceeds to walk off cackling, and of course Jim is insistent that obviously the touch-a-truck-a-thon is going to take all day, and he realizes that he's not going to be able to deliver the package during lunch like he thought. At which point Claire insists that they can deliver it. Although Jim points out that he was going to handle it, but she admits that she also admits that they all have to pull their weight, and points out that this is literally a basic drop off where they just take the box and mail it is probably the easiest call a Trollhunter can answer. And she points out that they'll be more than willing to handle it if it means being able to pull their weight and prove their worth to Jim. And eventually, Jim, realizing he pretty much doesn't have much of a choice, does relent. Although Toby once again continues to just kind of belittle her, pointing out that he's going to go with her and tag along because he doesn't want her, and of course admits that they're going to do a good job and deliver the box. And of course this causes Claire to roll her eyes at him, but of course Jim points out that he really doesn't have much to lose, so he does leave it in their capable hands. At which point they then proceed to go to the Cha-Cha-Truck-a-thon, and what we find out is that Senior Ol has a large white pickup truck that he drives, and he currently has that just parked in front of the school in the quad, and he openly admits that the Cha-Cha-Truck-a-thon is, well, he essentially assembles all three of the girls and all three of the guys for each of the nominees. We officially meet Shannon, who hadn't really appeared in an episode prior to this. She kind of did, sort of, when she was nominated for Spring Fling Queen, but we haven't really seen much of her. So this is kind of her first real major appearance. So we haven't really seen much of her. But of course, the Senior Ol, once all of them are gathered and touching the truck, then proceeds to tell them that the rules are simple. They just have to keep their hand on the truck for as long as possible. And they have to keep their hand on his truck for as long as possible. And the last person to take off their hand for either side is the winner. obviously, the guys and girls are actually being judged separately. So whoever wins the girl for the girls' side, that'll be the winner, and they're allowed to take their hand off the truck. And same goes for the guys. And of course it's a group of consisting of Darcy, Mary, and Shannon. While the guys of course are Eli, Steve, and Jim. And of course he then proceeds to start the school touch-a-truckathon, and of course everybody proceeds to touch the truck, but of course Steve immediately starts boasting about how he's not going to lose because he drank. As he admits, he drank 12 energy drinks the night prior to prepare for the event. And of course, this immediately causes the immediate obvious thing of where is Steve going to the bathroom if he's not allowed to leave? And of course, Steve reveals that he actually has already taken care of it. And Shannon eventually realizes that Steve is wearing a diaper and he's pissing into it, which is gross, but I admire his dedication. I do admit he is very dedicated to actually winning. And meanwhile, we find out that Mary is struggling a lot with the whole touch-a-truckathon, and she proceeds to and she's struggling because she has to go to the bathroom, and unlike Steve, she's not wearing a diaper. And of course she admits that she insists to know when there's going to be a bathroom break, but Senior immediately admits that that's the whole point. So he proceeds to tell them that. And eventually she realizes that it's not worth it and leaves, and that leaves her alone as the so competitive. That leaves both Shannon and Darcy alone while she just leaves and goes back to class because she had to go to the bathroom and pointed out it wasn't quite worth it to become Spring Fling Queen. So she just leaves. But and it's of course at this point where obviously we find out that Strickler is currently lurking around the school as usual, and he decides, because Jim is obviously indisposed, he decides that this is the perfect opportunity to tease Jim and mess with his head. And of course he immediately walks over to Jim and tells Jim that he heard from a mutual acquaintance, describing him as a Mr. Rot, that he had currently lost something very important to him, and Jim insists that he'll get it back, and of course Strickler just kind of points out that it's entirely possible that he may not, but he admires the dedication, but then also proceeds to tease Jim by admitting that he's going on yet another date with Jim's mother, and wonders if he has a breath mint, which of course causes Jim to fantasize punching Strickler right in the face, and of course they do actually animate him fantasizing about it, but the way they set it up is that we initially think, hey, he took his hand off the trunk to punch Strickler right in the face because which obviously wouldn't happen because Strickler's the principal currently, or the interim principal, so obviously that's not going to work out in Jim's favor. But eventually Shannon does pull out a thing of breath mints and tells Principal Strickler that he's welcome to one, which of course eliminates her from the group, and Darcy winds up becoming the winner for the girls' side, and she's allowed to go back to class. So all the girls just kind of get eliminated within the first 5 minutes of the Truckathon, so they unfortunately do not get to do anything. They just go back to school, and we do see them in the background of several shots involving Toby and Claire. But they just go back to the business. That's it. And of course, with that, it's down to Steve, Eli, and Jim. But eventually, Senior realizes that he also needs a bathroom/coffee break. So he goes inside and leaves Eli in charge, which of course winds up becoming a major thing. But of course he leaves Eli in charge and goes back inside because Eli's the responsible one of the three of them. So or at least according to Senior Ul. Obviously we know Jim is the Trollhunter, but obviously, Senior Ul doesn't really think much of Jim, as we find out a lot in this series. So we'll get to that. But Of course, is at this point where we see that now that's after fourth period, and now Toby and Claire are ready to go off and go deliver the package, and Claire asks Toby if he has the address, but quickly realizes that he lost it and doesn't know where it is. So, and of course, Claire is frustrated because obviously this is their first, quote-unquote Trollhunter mission, and she admits that they're going to need to find that address and tells Toby to check everywhere. So Toby, like an idiot, looks inside the box to see if he put it inside, which of course he didn't, because obviously nobody was supposed to open the box. Of course it wouldn't be in there, but and of course we don't find out what's in the little box. We just find out that it makes a loud whoosh before Toby immediately closes it. And of course Claire is angry that Toby opened the box, and when he was told not to. But and of course Toby admits that she told him to check everywhere, but eventually does find it and eventually does find the address in his back pocket when he realizes that that's where he actually put it. But she then asks him what he saw inside the box and whether or not it was anything cool. But he admits that there wasn't really anything inside. It was just a loud whoosh. And of course she's visibly confused because she obviously points out why would a box contain a whooshing. But points out he obviously has no idea. But he does point out that they'll just have to deal with it later because he's currently late to algebra. So he immediately goes and leaves while Claire just kind of tries to figure it out. And of course they just get ready to go and deliver the box later because they're supposed to deliver at lunch because Jim can't, and that was what Jim was planning to do. But of course what we find out is that Toby immediately goes to Miss Janet's algebra class. And he's sitting in class just half paying attention as she's explaining angles and triangles and those kinds of things and how to solve for angles. And during the class, Toby immediately and inexplicably starts floating. And Toby has no idea what's causing it at first. All he knows is that he's supposed to be in his seat and he's not. So he quickly realizes that whatever's going on is most likely a result of the whoosh. At which point, Miss Jenna notices that he's just levitating his chair and wonders if everything is all right. Very annoyedly, I may add, if everything is all right. And Toby just kind of jokes that just kind of half sheepishly admits that he's just really into triangles. At which point, she insists that he come up and solve the triangle that's currently on the board. But he tries to respectfully decline. But she points out that it wasn't a request, and demands he comes up to the board and solves the problem. So he drags his entire because the desk is currently the only thing keeping him grounded, he drags the entire desk up to the front of the room to solve the problem. Writes in very big writing so that he can actually reach the board from where he's sitting, and then proceeds to take several books from her desk to weigh himself down. At which point he proceeds to walk out of the room, and of course Miss Janet demands to know where he's going because obviously they're in the middle of class. But he points out that he's just gonna go to the bathroom and real fast, and then proceeds to take the several books that he brought with him out, and proceeds to stuff his backpack full of stuff, and so that it'll weigh him down. Which, of course, works initially until we meet his kid name. Well, we don't really, but he's kind of a friend of Steve's, and we haven't really formally met him. But a kid named Seamus proceeds to push Toby over and calls him Dumzowski, and that he should watch where he's going. At which point, all of the stuff falls out of Toby's backpack, and he starts floating again and starts panicking. And Claire's in the middle of her own class, and she just hears Toby calling to her from outside, and then she looks up and she sees Toby floating away and immediately panics and immediately insists, and of course then proceeds to immediately request. She's in Coach Lawrence's health class, so she proceeds to request that she be let go for woman-related reasons. She doesn't really clarify, obviously, but she runs outside and sees Toby clinging on, and we also see that Steve is currently trying to intimidate Jim by being very loud and in his face, and obviously the diaper then obviously he's wearing a dirty diaper, which is causing Jim to become upset. But Jim points out that he's not going to stop touching the truck, no matter how much in his face that Steve starts to get. And of course, at this point, where Claire then proceeds to see Jim and to see Toby clinging onto the school, and she admits that she wonders what he's doing up there, and he points out that he's just been levitating all day and he has no idea why. At which point, she realizes that whatever was in the box has cursed him and caused him to float, and they'll need to figure out a way, and they need to figure out a way to get him down. At which point she points out that maybe they can find Blinky and wonder where he is, and Toby concludes that he's currently at Jim's house, so that'll be a perfect place to look. But of course, Jim, in order to get to Jim's house, they have to kind of float a little bit. So of course Claire tries to reel him in and climbs up the flagpole to grab him and hold on to him, but she loses her grip and he starts floating away again. At which point, we see a scene between Barbara and Strickler, which is just, happening in the background of all of that. So, and of course, they just kind of float away, and we find out that obviously Barbara starts talking to Strickler about how he's been opening up to that Jim has been opening up a lot more about his father, specifically to the guidance counselor, and of course Strickler, and this is where the facade of Mr. Blinky is the guidance counselor that Strickler appointed, because Strickler obviously hears from her that he appointed a guidance counselor named Dr. Blinky. And named Mr. Blinky, and he has no idea who Mr. Blinky is. He openly admits that he's very visibly confused and almost chokes down his coffee before eventually regaining his composure. But of course she points out that she then proceeds to point out that they're on a date and she shouldn't be talking about Jim's father, points out that it's just been weighing on her a little bit recently, and he proceeds to put a hand on her hand and tells her that's perfectly fine and that he doesn't mind listening to her vent about her problems. This is of course at this point where Toby then proceeds to continue floating, and he proceeds to float down over to Jim's house, but they start floating away, and eventually Toby proceeds to float all the way to the canal. And of course he's panicking, but eventually he starts to stop floating, which of course is weird. He notes is weird, and he notes that seems to be finally wearing off, and he's not floating anymore. And of course he then proceeds to realize that the curse might be wearing off, but then realizes that no, the curse is just flip-flopping and making him heavy, and now he's too heavy to move. And Claire quickly surmises this, pointing out that obviously the levitation is flip-flopped and made him heavy again, which he points out he figured out on his own. But she proceeds to scoop him up into a bucket. Into what is it? She proceeds to scoop him up into a wheelbarrow, into a nearby wagon, which of course he points out is a problem, but of course she then proceeds to just kind of wheel along, at which point they're stopped by a cop, and the cop obviously knows they're supposed to be in school and outright tells them this, and but Claire proceeds to play it off as the whole, he's my brother and he has no bones, which works surprisingly well. The cop just kind of buys that. He admits that it's admittedly a little interesting that Toby has no bones, and immediately calls a squad car to pull him to safety. But of course we don't find, and of course Claire insists that that's fine and that they don't need a squad car. But the officer is insistent and proceeds to call dispatch and ask for a squad car to pick up Toby, calling him a boneless kid hero. But then he looks around and discovers that Toby and Claire are nowhere to be found, because Toby had floated off while he was talking. So he had no idea where he is, and he just kind of shrugs and goes back on his beat. And of course, in any case, let's should get back to Jim because Jim, of course, once Senior Ol leaves initially after a bit, and eventually Steve gets bored and then realizes that there's no real rules because obviously the only rule is that they need to keep their hand on the truck. So he starts trying to fight Jim, and Jim, of course, has several weeks worth of training under his belt at this point. Possibly a month's worth of training at this point. So he's obviously able to fend off Steve's quote-unquote assault. But of course, Eli is trying to break up the whole situation by just kind of telling them not to fight. But of course, they continue to fight, climbing inside and outside the truck while keeping their hand on the truck the entire time. And of course, they just proceed to fight each other and punch each other. And eventually, Eli winds up falling into the bed of the truck, which of course winds up being which of course once Steve concludes that Eli is gone, it concludes it's just him and Jim. But and they continue to fight. And of course Jim is very insistent that he doesn't want to fight Steve and points out that they don't really have time for and that they really don't have time for their nonsense. But wonders why Steve is being so insistent that he win. At which point Steve decides to open up to Jim a little bit. As we find out, Steve is kind of obsessed with winning the event because, as he points out, since the first episode, Jim has kind of been getting victory over Steve. And it started when Jim knocked Steve's tooth out, and then he got benched from the musical, got benched from the football team. And then obviously now Jim has Claire, which of course he points out that he hasn't really had many wins lately against Jim, and also points out that because of that he's a little bit intimidated by Jim. And Jim, after hearing this, proceeds to take his hand out of the vehicle and decides to let Steve have it. And Steve reveals that it was all a facade, of course, but of course the fact that it is a little bit interesting because obviously Steve wouldn't be just pulling that out of nowhere. That's not how people work. But he wouldn't just be pulling that out of nowhere. But of course he immediately starts celebrating because he thinks he won, and immediately rubs it in Jim's face. And meanwhile, we're not there yet. But Senior Ol is told while he's in the faculty on his coffee break that he's in the faculty room on his coffee break that said that a fight has broken out, and he immediately comes outside not to check on the students, but to check on his truck and make sure that his truck is okay. And of course he proceeds to call it Susanna, which it's fun little trivia fact, is named after his long-distance girlfriend. He has it's not stated in the shows, but in one of the books, I think, it goes on to explain, it's explained that he has a long-distance girlfriend that he almost never sees, so he named his truck after her, which is cute. But he's very, but also he's very lovey with his truck, which is a little bit more weird, but of course, eventually, after confirming that the truck is fine and that there seems to be no visible damage to it, that seems to be perfectly fine, and points out that he's just glad that the fight didn't scuff up his truck, he then concludes that they have a winner, which, of course, Steve starts celebrating because he thinks he's the one that won, until it's revealed that Eli, in the bed of the truck, still had his hand on the truck. He didn't take it off at any point. He just fell in the bed of the truck and was completely fine. But what we find out is that Eli has won the Touch a Truckathon, which of course surprises Steve. That he lost to Eli of all people. Well, Jim is just happy that it's over, and of course, meanwhile, it's at this point where Claire eventually finds out where Toby floated off, and in the process, he floats past Claire's house. And of course he realizes that she's floating past Claire's house, so he calls to Don Enrique, and Don Enrique comes out and wonders what exactly it is that Toby's doing up there, and he points out that there's some sort of curse thing and that he's floating away, and insists that Don Enrique help him. At which point Don Enrique decides to not help Toby, instead pulls out his phone and proceeds to take a selfie insisting that he'll send it to Toby later. And Toby, of course, tries to call Claire and let her know what's going on, because obviously her brother isn't much help, but he winds up just dropping his phone instead. So he of course he winds up floating off. And admits that this is probably how he's going to die. And eventually he floats off toward the canal and grabs onto one of the light posts there, because he realizes that he's just barely tall enough to he's just barely able to reach it. But it's at this point where Claire then proceeds to run over to him, and is obviously very insistent and is obviously brings a kite, and which for him to grab onto. Toby is very thankful for her, but then also insists that she pull him in. But she then admits that she's not going to do that until he apologizes, and proceeds to point out that he's been a bit of a butt to her pretty much the whole day. And yeah, he's been a bit of an ass. I will admit that. That's kind of the point. He's been jealous of Claire pretty much the whole day, and while I've kind of glossed over it, that's pretty much the entirety of the conflict of this episode. Toby is jealous of Claire and lets her know very passive-aggressively, in no uncertain terms, pretty much anytime they interact with each other on screen in this episode. And of course she proceeds to point, and of course he proceeds to, but of course she points out, she admits that she points out that she won't reel him in unless he apologizes. So he then proceeds to apologize and proceeds to reveal why he's been upset with her the whole day, pointing out that obviously Claire got her little shadow staff thing. Obviously that was a big thing for her, but also points out that because of that, she points out that Claire is officially more useful than him, and points out that she's a little bit insecure because he hasn't really had anything of any sort of use to actually aid Jim in his journey to become a great troll hunter, and he no longer thinks he's a worthy ally to Jim. And it also points out that obviously Claire, meanwhile, she's pretty, she's smart, she's capable, she's able to do basically everything that Toby wishes he could do as the sidekick. And of course, Claire, after hearing that, points out that she's not there to break them up per se, pointing out that obviously Jim and Toby have been the dynamic duo for pretty much the entire time that they've known each other. And points out that obviously she's not going to she's not going to get in the way of that. And Toby, of course, breathes a sigh of relief, pointing out that he doesn't know how happy it is to make them hear that, and points out that he's very happy that they can be friends and move on from it. But then they find out that, as he's getting all sentimental, Claire proceeds to reveal that actually the curses seem to have spreading, and now she's levitating. And quickly points out that they need to get to Jim's house, and quickly. At which point we see a cutaway between Blinky and Droll in the basement, and Blinky again is still in human form. I'll mention that, but he's in the basement, but they're in the basement and are discussing Claire's training with the Shadow Staff, and of course Droll proceeds to point out that it's been very touch and go, and points out that he's not entirely sure if she'll ever be properly able to wield the staff, but of course, it's at this point where they hear Claire and Toby hollering, and they immediately run upstairs to check on them. And of course, they quickly find out that obviously everything starts levitating inside the house, and they quickly point out what the problem is. And of course, Blinky is completely confused as to what exactly is going on. But then the little box that they were carrying around floats out of Claire's backpack and into his arms, and he understands immediately that it's some sort of curse. But also then proceeds to point out that they're going to need to get to Vendel, because Vendel knows exactly what to do. And of course Droll immediately comes in, immediately realizes what's going on, and while he starts floating as well, he immediately hands Claire her shadow staff and tells them to make Blinky instruction to make a portal to Vendel, so that they can actually, get to them. And also because they're in the house starts levitating as well, which is a problem, and is almost ripped free from its foundation, which isn't great. But of course Claire is insistent that she can't do it, admitting that obviously she thinks she's not gonna, be great at the whole teleporting people thing, pointing out that obviously she can only really make portals small enough to teleport a small gnome or a small map or tiny mouse or whatever they need. That's small. But and of course they point out that she needs to just clear her mind and focus on Vendel, which she's obviously struggling with. So Toby, left with no other choice, then proceeds to deliberately belittle her. And he then proceed, and of course this causes Claire to become angry at him because he's just suddenly being an asshole to her out of the blue again. And he, of course, he's kind of just venting about all of her frustration about all the things she's done wrong, about how they lost the stone. She's letting a bunch of people down right now by not being able to summon a portal to transport people through. And eventually Blinky and Droll realize what Toby's doing and join in and continue to egg her on. And of course, Claire is visibly confused as to why Toby would be this mean to her when they're supposed to be friends again. At which point, Toby asks her if all of the things he's saying is making her angry, and she admits that obviously, yeah, it is. At which point, he tells her to look at the staff and think of Vendel, and she finally realizes what he's actually done. And with that, she's able to successfully create a portal to Vendel, and of course, she immediately teleports into Vendel's workshop, where she tells Vendel to pull them through, and they pull them through the portal, and this fixes Jim's house, which is no longer floating, but is a mess. I should mention, it is just obviously all the furniture just floated away, but and of course, Vendel quickly immediately blames Blinky and wonders what exactly it is he's done. But of course, Blinky is insistent that it was all Toby's fault and proceeds to tell Vendel exactly that it was Toby's fault. So, but of course, Toby admits that it wasn't entirely his fault, and that they've had some sort of box, but does point out that Vendel should be able to fix it. And of course, Vendel points out that he won't be able to just remove the curse, and that they need to transfer it into some sort of vessel, and points out that it could be literally anything. But then Toby points out that it doesn't have to be literally anything, and he knows just the thing to put the curse in. And sure enough, you remember the Warhammer? Yeah, Toby decides that the best vessel to put the curse into the Warhammer is the Warhammer as a vessel for his curse, which just enables him to carry it around effortlessly most of the time. I'll admit that. So, as we find out, Toby immediately uses the hammer, and now happy that he finally has his Warhammer, he decides to give it a test drive by sparring against Claire, who is also happy that she finally was able to successfully summon a portal, and then decide to get into the good vibes of it and start sparring. And of course, what we quickly find out is that Toby doesn't have complete control over his Warhammer yet. We'll get to that. He does get better control over it as the series goes on, but that is a thing. Toby doesn't really quite have control of the Warhammer yet. It just floats away. But it floats away as he's fighting Claire, and he has to chase after it. But it's at this point where they point out that it's obviously a very moving thing. At which point, Jim walks in and is a little confused as to what happened, but also wonders if his team was able to successfully deliver the package like he asked them to. And of course, Blinky proceeds to tell them that no, they didn't. But Vendel then proceeds to cut him off, and then proceeds to tell them that they performed their duties admirably, and then proceeds to tell them that he has the makings of a pretty quality team, and that in time they'll be very supportive. They'll be able to support Jim on his journey, and Jim, happy to hear that, then proceeds to also engage Claire and Toby in some light sparring, and does proceed to comment on the fact that Toby got really good with his Warhammer all of a sudden, because obviously Toby struggled to lift it a little bit, and now obviously he can lift it no problem. And of course that's how the episode ends, with them sparring and Toby getting his Warhammer finally. So yeah, obviously this episode obviously progresses Barbara and Stricter's relationship, because, even the fact that, being a villain aside, that is the one genuine relationship he seems to have with somebody. He has developed a genuine relationship with Barbara, and does seem to actually enjoy spending time with her, and isn't just, spending time with, well, he is trying to spend time with her to get under Jim's skin, but he also does seem to genuinely enjoy spending time with her, which is interesting. And it is becoming increasingly apparent that it's not just a facade. He actually has feelings for her. But also, more to the point, we find out that Steve may or may not have some insecurities, because, and that is a thing, Steve has some insecurities about himself. But and this is one of the earliest episodes to imply it, because up until this point, Steve's just been this this asshole who nobody likes. And this is the first episode where we finally get a peek past the mask and be like, oh, he's a little insecure and a little bit broken. He's a little bit of a mess. But he plays it off as, making it up to kind of get under Jim's skin so that he can win the Touch a Truckathon. Obviously, that's not entirely how that works. So, yeah, that's not how human beings behave. But, yeah, so that does imply that Steve does have some deep-seated insecurities about himself. And also, more to the point, this episode is where Toby and Claire get a little bit closer in this episode since now they're friends. But, more to the point, this is the episode where Toby gets his Warhammer, and as I said at the start, it is hilarious, because Toby does train and get better at using the Warhammer, because obviously the Warhammer doesn't quite listen to him yet. It just floats off, does whatever it wants for a little bit longer. But in this episode, Toby officially gets his Warhammer, and because of the curse, he's able to just swing it around, no problem, effortlessly, without any sort of issues. But of course, it doesn't. Obviously, it's not going to listen to him 100% yet until he does eventually get better with it. But that's not for a while yet. So, yeah, that's gonna do it for today's video. In my today's review, that's essentially what the story is. It's just about Toby getting his Warhammer with some character development things thrown in. That's essentially what the story is. But yeah, it's a fun episode because it's a fun episode for a number of reasons. But it's funny. It's a fun episode. I enjoy it a lot. But yeah, in case that's gonna do it for my review of Trollhunters. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does help support me, so please go do that. Go and check out maybe go check out my Twitch. I mean, Twitch is being a bit of a mess right now because they introduced a bunch of policies, and I figured I would comment on that. That's been going on for like the past week, for the past couple of days. So I figured I'd bring it up here, but it's not really there, but I should mention Twitch is kind of going down the toilet a little bit, so I figured I would mention that. But yeah, and also be sure and go and check out my Discord. Link is also down in the description. That's also going a little bit down the toilet because they also introduced a couple of, social media is a mess. It's run by people who are a mess, but it's Twitter as well. We're not going to get into that, but yeah, it's all a mess. But yeah, in case, yeah, go check all those things out. And also, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!